So this is part one of the first lecture on the cardiovascular system, which is an introduction into the basic anatomy and physiology. This first lecture, we're going to cover over the next 3 videos, the overall basic anatomy of the cardiovascular system and the structure of the heart, the blood vessels, as well as the nerves that supply the cardiovascular system. And then we're going to talk about the microcirculation. And what we're going to do is we'll go through all this in a little bit of detail in this lecture, and we'll go into more detail on the heart and conduction systems and then the circulatory system in later lectures. One of the most important questions you need to ask when thinking about the cardiovascular system is, why have a circulatory system at all? Why do we have one? What does it do? And you're probably already aware of some of the answers to these questions. We have a circulatory system because we have billions of cells in our body. We need to get nutrients to all of those cells. We need to exchange gases, we supply oxygen, remove carbon dioxide from respirating and cells and organs. Now, the thing about nutrient and gas exchange is that if we just relied on diffusion, as you would perhaps in an organ bath or a petri dish, then that's a passive process, and it would rapidly reach equilibrium within that closed system. So in an organism like your body, you need to circulate those fluids in order to stop that equilibrium from forming, but to maintain the dynamic equilibrium. In other words, to maintain those diffusion gradients that allow the nutrients and gases to be exchanged. And you've learnt about that, the dynamic equilibrium in Dr. Tamanini's lectures. So the main thing is we need a circulatory system. So what does it need in order to function? So I think the best analogy for this is to think of your circulatory system as an exquisite central heating system. So, but in essence, it's the same as your central heating system at home. You need a pump, which is the driving force. It's in a closed loop. You have a circulatory system. You're recycling the blood around the body, just as you would recycle the water that's contained within your central heating system. And we also need areas where there's a large area for diffusion and solute exchange. And this is where we have an area where the blood vessels supplying organs can allow diffusion and solutes to exchange with the tissues. And that is a really large surface area. And to give you sort of context of how large a surface area is of your circulatory system, if you were to put all your blood vessels, line them up end to end, you'd probably drive around the earth 3 times. And it's an enormous surface area. Now this picture here is actually a plastination of a human body. So if you've ever been to the Body Worlds exhibition, you'll have seen something similar. This is where a kind of plastic substance has been pumped into the circulatory system, and then the rest of the tissues digested away. And what you can see is a vast amount of blood vessels, particularly around the head, the lungs, and some of your major internal organs. And essentially, we have two loops in our circulatory system. So we have the circulatory system that supplies the lung. If you remember the lungs, so blood will be pumped into the lungs where fluids will diffuse and then return into the left-hand chamber of the heart. And then the second system is what we call the systemic circulation. That then gets pumped from the left-hand side of the heart all around the rest of the body and also to the head structures. So if we look at the heart in a little bit more detail now, and again, many of you will be familiar with the structure of the heart. Now, some of you might have been slightly confused by me calling this side of the heart the left-hand side, because it appears on the right-hand side. But that's because we're looking face on towards the heart. If you imagine this is the left-hand side as you face out. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. And on the left-hand side here, we have a schema showing the direction of flow of blood during heartbeat. So I'm going to take the direction of flow of blood from the right-hand side of the heart first. So blood that's returning either from the head or the rest of the body fills the right atria and then enters into the right ventricle. Now, blood entering the right ventricle when the heart contracts is pumped out of the pulmonary artery, and that circulates around the lungs where the blood becomes oxygenated. Blood then returning to the heart from via the pulmonary veins begins to fill the left atria and then drains into the left ventricle, where it is pumped around the rest of the body and leaves via the aorta. Now, hopefully you can see the atria and particularly the ventricles, the walls are filled up by cardiac muscle, which allows the heart to pump. And that's shown a little bit better on this structure. But you can see the four-chambered structure, four muscle chambers, and the basic flow of blood through the heart during a heartbeat. So that's the pumping action. The other thing you've got to remember about the heart is that conduction of a heartbeat is controlled via electrical activity. And again, this is something we will come to in later lectures. But the heart has its own intrinsic pacemaker cells which control the heart rate. So the heart has, if you like, a command center located in the right atria in a group of cells called the sinoatrial node. It's in the sinoatrial node that action potentials, electrical impulses are generated, and these electrical impulses, which I'm just drawing over here in green, they spread across both atria and cause the atria to contract. What you can then hopefully see is that this electrical impulse is blocked by this fibrous skeleton, which divides the chambers, and those action potentials are picked up in the second spot, which we call the atrioventricular node. And this senses and then delays the action potentials generated across the atria, and then it coordinates them throughout the ventricle muscle, and they contract at a slightly later moment in time. The other thing to note here again is those muscular chambers, the valves that separate the chambers of the heart, and the very thick musculature of the heart muscle itself. And we'll come back to a bit more detail about the heart structure in a later lecture. Now, while the electrical conductivity of the heart allows the heart to beat without any external control, in other words, the heart can beat to its own rhythm via the rate of the sinoatrial node, there is also innervation. And there's two main types of innervation to the heart. We have supplied by the vagus nerve, we have the parasympathetic nerves. Now, the parasympathetic nerves dominate the conduction of the heart at rest, and they reduce heart rate and force of contraction. And now the parasympathetic nerve that supplies the heart is called the vagus nerve. So it's really important. I know that other lecturers in this series of lectures in this module will refer to parasympathetic innervation as vagal innervation. That's because the nerve that carries the parasympathetic nerves to the heart is called the vagus nerve. The other nervous system is, again, part of the autonomic nervous system, is the sympathetic nervous system. Now, the sympathetic nervous system releases noradrenaline onto the heart, and it stimulates the rate of contraction of the heart, and it also increases the force of contraction of the heart. So it makes the heart beat stronger and faster. And for more information about the autonomic nervous system, please see Professor Stevens' lectures. Dr. Tamagnini will also talk about the autonomic nervous system in some of his lectures as well.